I'll tell you a little bit about my work and my life, and then some of my tips for us as women, as leaders, as we go through these difficult times, and also as professional women just generally. So this is sort of my story, and the image I've chosen here is a little car on the road because I had a really lovely, really nice childhood. I grew up in the country in Northern Ireland. I lived in a farm. I lived with my parents and my grandparents, which was a really, really privileged situation to grow up in. And that was wonderful. So I had parents who both worked, which meant that we were quite privileged, and we had lots of material resources, I suppose, compared to other people around us. And I went to Thornhill, the notorious school from Derry Girls, and I was that kind of generation in the 1990s, and that was me. But because I lived so far away from Derry, I actually had to get 3 buses every day in and out to school. So I got up really, really early, and I've always had that kind of work ethic because of growing up on a farm with 4 girls. We always supported the farm and did a lot of work on the farm. So that was my life, and I ended up going to Thornhill and getting loads of buses in the morning and coming home quite late. But I loved school. I really, really loved it. I also loved creative stuff, so I was really into art as well. And when it came to deciding what to do for university, it was going to be art or psychology, and both of those subjects were a real risk. So I was growing up at a time when girls in grammar schools were supported and encouraged to do subjects like nursing or teaching or medicine or dentistry, one of the professions. So I was really interested in art, and I also had an interest in psychology, and these were very kind of random, radical things to be doing. And even my parents weren't so sure when I was making these decisions. I was the first person from my whole family to go to university, and there were very few people from around here in those days that even went to grammar schools because it was very dangerous. The troubles were at its height then. But anyhow, I went to Queen's, and I really, really enjoyed university so much. And I also had a boyfriend at the time, and that was great. And he was in Belfast with me. And after that, I continued with that university stuff and went to Galway and did a master's in health psychology. So I did psychology at Queen's, health psychology in Galway. And straight after that, I was doing really well. But again, I wanted to get a job and get married and do all those wonderful things. So I took up employment in the Western Health Board in Galway, and moved back up to the north and got a job then actually in the Ulster University as a researcher. Now, back in those days, if you had a master's, you could get a job as a researcher. So that was what I did. And I worked with a GP called Donal Macaulay, who was actually a great mentor for me, an incredible individual, and still works in West Belfast. And he's one of the editors of the Canadian Medical Journal too. And he's been just a supporter. But he encouraged me then to do a PhD. And again, it wasn't a thing that people like me did. This was very unusual. And so I did a PhD, but I was working at the same time. So I was always doing lots of things at the same time. And I got married and everything was going grand. And I was working in the university. And then the next slide kind of sums it up. My marriage ended very, very unexpectedly for me. And there was a series of deaths around the same time. My granny, my granda, and I'd grown up with these people, so it was just such a loss. And my aunt died very suddenly as well, all in the space of a few years. And my marriage broke up. My aunt died within the space of a few months. And that really, really, really shook me. And that plunged me so into a state of what I would call definitely depression. It took me a long time to get over those things. I got help. I had counselling, and I also took antidepressants for a couple of years. And that was really, really important in helping me recover. But I also credit those things that happened to me around that time with the start of really a journey that sees me now as interim mental health champion for Northern Ireland. So I focused very much on my career, and despite all the mental health problems that I was having, and I really struggled to cope, to sleep, to eat, I had difficulties in all of those areas. I focused on my work and I got promoted and I did really well in the university. And in 2013, I became a professor. And then I made the decision a few years later that what I wanted was to be a parent, and I became a single mother by choice. So that was really difficult. At the stage, I was in my very late 30s. I had a lot of health problems prior to that as well. So I needed to do a lot. It wasn't a simple matter of getting a donor for me. I needed to go and have extensive treatment. So I went to Spain to do that. And my daughter Annabelle then was born after four different attempts. One resulted in a loss as well for me. And I'm now a parent of a 3.5-year-old, and she is just an absolute joy. And my life has never been better. But ultimately, it nearly took that car crash to bring all these things together. And then last August, I was asked to be the interim mental health champion for Northern Ireland, because there was a lot of things happening then. There was the New Decade, New Approach deal, which got our government back running again, and that promised a mental health plan. And in that plan was this idea of a champion who would drive forward the change and be that link between the population and the people in the Department of Health who were developing the strategy. So I took on that job, and here I am, and the job's now up, the advertisements out there. So I'm hoping to apply for that if I can get a spare minute in the next few weeks. So one of the things I wanted to get across to you all when we're thinking about mental health and well-being, and really this is kind of the crux of it for me, is this idea of our circuits of survival, our stress response pathways, and how we can manage our mental well-being by having an understanding of how stress affects us individually. So in the middle there, we've got safe and social, which is where we want to be most of the time. And as women, as carers, as family members, as leaders in the workplace, this is the place from which we need to lead, because this is the place from which we can be calm and engaged, when we can have joy and hope and curiosity, when we can really see other people's perspectives. Whenever we are in a state of danger, when we sense danger in any way, we go up into fight or flight. Our stress response pathways kick in. We are mobilized, we are vigilant, we are aggressive. Whenever we have grief, bereavement, trauma, death, divorce, all of those things, that plunges us into shutdown. And that's a state from which we need to heal. That's a trauma. And we get really disconnected. So if we think of ourselves as human animals, this is when the animal is playing dead, when it's a freeze response that protects the animal from the predator. It's also the reason why when women are attacked or assaulted, often they're not able to fight back, because their body is in freeze mode. And it's a survival state that has evolved. So fight or flight is where we were when this pandemic happened, and fight or flight is where we are whenever we are stressed out, whenever we stress ourselves out with our self-talk, whenever we scroll needlessly through the social media and face all of the anger of the world. We're in fight or flight. That plunges us there. And what we're always trying to do with our own self-awareness and the awareness of stress and the impact on our body is to bring us back into safe and social, so that we can be good leaders, we can be good parents, we can be good family members, we can do our work really well. And the strength of women is whenever we are in safe and social, we are really strong, because we can connect, we can see other people's perspectives. And I would never, ever apologize for that. But we need to understand when we're in fight or flight and when we're in safe and social, we need to know the difference. We need to be able to be aware of where we are on that whole trajectory. And one of the interesting things that our last speaker spoke about there was this idea of plasticity. And ultimately, if we're up in fight or flight, too often we can get stuck up there. And the thing recalibrates, the thresholds recalibrate. So we go up there more easily. So whenever we're talking about self-care and protecting our mental health, we're talking about how we understand when we're up in fight or flight and bring ourselves back down to safe and social, or when we know that when we're in shutdown and we need time to heal and recover again, to bring us slowly and gradually back up again into a state from which we can be compassionate, we can be carers, and we can lead, and we can do our jobs in the best way that we can. So this is another little slide that I like to use to explain how how the pandemic is affecting us and how we work as a social species. So this is the whole field of community neuroscience. Our brains are wired to be part of communities of human beings. We're not meant to be individuals. We are tuned in to other mammals, to other human mammals, and that's called neuroception. And we can pick up very, very quickly and easily and subconsciously whenever any of the herd, any of our pack, whenever they're getting stressed. And we mirror the survival states of other mammals in the herd. So if one of our pack, one of our family, especially if it's the leader, and as women, we are often the leaders. So, we're setting the tone a lot of the time. But if we are in that state of danger, if we're in fight or flight, the other members of the pack, they can tell, they will know straight away, and they will get scared too. So our first job as women, as leaders, as parents, which is a very important part of my life, is keeping myself safe and social. Is that self-care? Really, really absolutely crucial, because it sets the tone. It helps everybody else. It helps us all do the job that we need to do right now, and it helps us problem solve. So I'm going to flick on to the last few slides because we are a wee bit short of time. And one of the questions I was asked to think about for today's presentation was what we as women can do to support each other's mental health and to support our own mental health. So I've come up with this. So this is the idea of we are little meerkats. We are part of the pack, but we're also pack leaders. And we need to self-regulate. We need to be aware of our stress response and emotionally regulate before we can actually lead, before we're in a position to lead. So important. If we don't do this, we will make bad decisions and we will transmit ripples of negative energy, of fear throughout our pack. And that is not good. So we've got to self-regulate so that we can compassionately problem solve with other people rather than for other people. And that, again, it applies to our lives as parents, as community members, and as leaders in the workforce. It's important that we know when to ask for help. We know our own limitations. And I think that was a very important point that I took away from the last presentation too, that, we need to actually say somebody else can do this. We need some help with this. We can't do everything. And, this idea that women have that we can multitask, it is not possible to do two things at the same time. We will do both of them really badly. Now, I'm not talking about the muscle memory where we're listening to the radio and driving the car at the same time. That's different. But when we actually have to work and look after a child at the same time, that is not possible. And we need to be realistic and actually communicate that. And stop kind of sending out the superwoman thing that we're somehow magical, and by virtue of the fact that we're women that we can do all this stuff. And we've actually got to hand over some of the power that brings us. We've got to hand that over and say, hey, actually, if you're lucky enough to have a partner, I don't have a partner, I kind of do have to do it all. If you're lucky enough to have a partner, yeah, you can do some of that. Let's buy and help, do whatever you can to free yourself up. The other thing is this idea of core values. What are your core values? What do you stand for? And know what they are, and be very, very aware of them. And I put reminders all over the place of what my core values are. My daughter is certainly, myself as a mother, that's a core part of who I am. It's a reason why I do what I do. But there's also other elements of my job that are so important. And I need to remind myself of that, of what it's all about, of what the bigger picture is. Otherwise, we can get lost in the minutiae and the detail. It's so important that we learn to have courageous conversations, and women really need to do this because we shirk away from confrontation. We're people pleasers. We want to maintain good relationships. And that's something that I think a lot of women will do. So we need to get into that safe and social place and practice and learn how to have courageous conversations and how to say no. And that's not going to happen right now. And, without feeling that we are setting ourselves up for confrontation. It is one of the things I think that differentiate good leaders from people who are less good, is this idea of actually having the courage to face problems head on. We also need to think about how our coping strategies are serving us at the minute. You know, a lot of people, particularly at the start of the pandemic, were drinking a bit more, we're trying to do too much, we're squeezing everything in, and we're not getting the outcomes that we want. So we need to think about, well, how are we coping right now, and how is that working out? Right. So if we're running about too much and not eating and not sleeping enough, that is not going to serve us well. We also need to prioritize our physical health, our safety, our food, sleep, exercise, those sorts of things, because we need to tell our animal brain that we are healthy, that we are going to survive, that everything is okay. And that feedback will also then help us with our own levels of anxiety. So our physical health is so connected to our mental health. There's a loop. And the first thing that I would recommend people do whenever they have problems with their mental health or waiting for services or anything like that is, right, start to focus on the physical, try and get that right, so that at least your brain and your nervous system is healthy, going into the problem solving that's going to be required to untangle a mental health problem. We've got to stop scrolling and control our exposure to the types of negative experiences or distressing experiences that fling us up into fight or flight. So we need to be very careful about our exposure to social media and news and all the things that people are saying about us. If we're leaders and women online, we know what that is, and we've got to just stay away from that where we can, or control it so that it doesn't put us into that stressed out state, which is not good for us. And then we need to take some time out to reflect and set our goals and think about what our goals are. And there's lots of ways of doing that, and lots of techniques and lots of things online again that you can get that will help you with that goal setting. But giving ourselves the time and space to do it is actually a really important first step.